Welcome to the closing session, Key Policy Updates Impacting Parenting Students. I would like to introduce you to one of our parenting scholars, Michelle Taylor, who will then introduce our final speaker. Michelle received her associate's degree from Columbus State Community College and is currently working on her bachelor's in business management entrepreneurship. She is also working on a 4-series guidebook for single parents. She and her 4-year-old daughter, Alani, are Access Scholars living in the Columbus Scholar House. Take it away, Michelle.
Thank you, Ms. Tracy. So I will be introducing Lindsey Reichlin Cruse. She is the study director at the Institution for Women's Policy Research. She leads the IWPR Student Parent Success Innovative, which raises awareness and shares strategies to promote the post-secondary success of mothers and other college students with caregiving responsibilities. Her work includes a project on expanding reproductive healthcare access for community college students and a study examining the experiences of returning adult learners who are also parents. Lindsey's recent publications include Investing in Single Mothers' Higher Education, Costs and Benefits to Individual Families, and Society in Centering the Student Voice. Um, Community colleges and sexual and reproductive health access in Texas and Mississippi. She's an expert in supporting non-traditional student success in post-secondary education. Lindsey has been quoted in several outlets, including the Washington Post, the New York Times, NPR, and The Atlantic. Lindsey has an MA from Columbia University and a BA from the University of California, Los Angeles. Lindsey, welcome to the session and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Let me just share my screen, make sure I don't mess it up. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me be the final speaker of this incredible conference that has been going on for, I think, over a decade. It's really wonderful to be with you all today. I appreciate you spending a little time with me this afternoon after what I can imagine are multiple wonderful sessions. And I want to thank, in particular, Tracy, Jillian, Jessica, Michelle, and the rest of the OSU Access Collaborative team for having me, but also continuing to put on such wonderful programming focused specifically on student parent success. And hopefully next year we'll all be together in person rather than virtual, because what a year it's been, especially for student parents. We all know that the pandemic has exacerbated and deeply underscored the existing inequities in our society, and that student parents have sat at the intersection of the pandemic's impact on US families. Women and mothers, specifically Black, Latina, and Indigenous women, have borne the brunt of this downturn, and any discussion of recovery and building back better, as the case may be, must prioritize their needs. We also know that student parents are a majority mothers. 2 in 5 are single mothers, and Black and Indigenous women in college are particularly likely to be parenting. So these women are also likely to have suffered disproportionately from the events of the past year and a half. Even before the pandemic, most student parents relied on paid employment while in college. They lived with low incomes or incomes below the poverty line, and they faced a shortage of affordable and quality childcare, as well as other needed support. So it's unsurprising that available evidence suggests that student parents have been especially likely to pause or delay educational plans in light of the pandemic. But there's light on the horizon, I'd say, both in terms of vaccinations, but also the conversations that we're now having and hearing at federal and state levels about massive and historic investments in childcare and paid leave, higher education, and other sectors, which could represent a significant turning point for student parent families. But our job is to make sure that student parents' unique needs and experiences remain at the forefront of these reforms as they're hashed out among policymakers. So excitingly, we have seen some wins, which I'm going to share a bit today, and I'm sure you've already heard at some point during the conference. And I'm going to share a little bit about some proposed legislation that holds real promise for boosting opportunity for students with kids, for those children, and for families more broadly. I'm also going to talk about some of our recent recommendations for federal policy in particular, just to let you know where we're coming from in terms of our kind of policy wish list for student parents and within these policy reform conversations. So I will get started with those summaries. And I should say one thing, I'm going to highlight a number of proposed legislation as well as some new laws, but I'm giving a very high level summary. I'm trying to highlight the points that are particularly impactful for student parents. So just keep that in mind. This is not the full breadth of these pieces of legislation. So the first, of course, on everybody's mind is the pandemic. We saw an impressive investment made by the American Rescue Plan earlier this year to continue our effort to recover and make up for the damage of both the health crisis, but also the economic crisis. What I've listed here are a series of kind of direct support for families, which would definitely support student parent families. There's an kind of expansion on what it's been done before, inclusion, for example, of college age students and stimulus checks that went out to parents. But overall, I think it represents, getting back to a baseline. Not listed here are, historic billions of dollars invested in higher education as well as childcare to help those sectors recover, both themselves as providers, but also their students. So, it's an important kind of stopgap, but it has to be a foundation for building off of to kind of get back on the course to reform that is structural, that is intentional about addressing systemic inequity that's ingrained in policy as it is now. One thing I wanted to point out in this list is the fact that we did see some guidance from the Office of Head Start around how Head Start providers could think about utilizing the funds that Head Start received from this the American Rescue Plan. And they specifically named community colleges as a potential partner to help parents who are interested in either going back to school to reskill or upskill, or going to school for the first time because they're seeing that necessary credential as part of the way to get back into living wage employment. So we continue to emphasize that strategy, and we'll be releasing some new policy pieces as well as practical guides to help folks think through what that might look like on the ground. And then, excitingly, in late April, the administration announced the American Families Plan, and I hope you've all seen a little bit about this, but I just wanted to pull out some of the bits that I felt were particularly important for student parent families. Historic investments in a national free community college program, a significant increase in Pell Grants, a grant program for wraparound support services with childcare named specifically as a service that could be supported under such a program, as well as investments in HBCUs, TCUs, and MSIs, which are minority serving institutions. In addition, massive, really exciting potential investments in universal pre-K as well as our childcare system. These investments would represent really important progress towards improving access to educational opportunities, both for parents and their children. We know how hard it is for student parents to find the care they need and that they can afford. Campus childcare and Seat Campus can only go so far, even with historic investments. So we need to improve the system overall to make sure that student parent families are getting the support they need. And this is, sort of a blueprint for what we hope can become reality ultimately. So I'll talk in a second about some of the proposals that would kind of fill in some of these gaps and could serve as a pathway for making some of this happen. So free college, for example, and I should say free is quotes, since we know tuition and fees are not the only costs associated with college. But that being said, this is a hot topic right now. We know Dr. Biden is a huge advocate for community college, for students, for student women and parents. And This is particularly important for student parents because we know parents take on higher levels of debt and they have higher levels of unmet financial need while they're in college. So especially single mothers, Black student parents, the levels of educational debt are unsustainable, and their likelihood of defaulting, particularly if they leave college without a degree, is much higher. And that has long run implications in addition to not having that degree. So making college more affordable is a huge priority for this population. And given what we've seen proposed in the American Families Plan, these legislative proposals create additional momentum and potential blueprints for what a free community college program might look like on a national scale. So I'm just highlighting two main proposals here. They focus on community college with at least one of them looking to the making four-year college more affordable for families making under $125,000 a year. And both have an explicit focus on investing in access to minority serving institutions like HBCUs and tribal colleges and universities. So, we'll see where we get with these, but I think the fact that we've seen some serious proposals, and in addition to the administration's support, we're hoping that this can gain some traction. And then talking about childcare, which we know is just can't understate how important it is for student parents who have young children and school-age children. So these proposals here, you may have heard of some of them. Some of them are kind of being reintroduced every year. Some of them are new, but generally they are working to make childcare much more affordable and high quality childcare much more available in general. So they take a position both on the supply of childcare and including looking at childcare worker wages, in addition to the experience of the consumer, of families, to make sure that families are not, bending over backwards to make ends meet while providing, finding childcare for their kids. So I provided a little bit of just a back of the envelope estimate of what these proposals might mean for student parents. You can see the Child Care for Working Families Act could potentially affect over half of student parents, which is about 2 million people. That's the number and share of student parents who are living at that income level below 150% of the poverty threshold. The Universal Child Care and Early Learning Act is a $700 billion investment over 10 years, so substantial investment in building a stronger childcare system for families both working and studying. This would reach a greater proportion of the student parent population living with incomes below 200% of poverty, so about 2.5 million students. And then the most recent Building an Economy, or maybe it's not the most recent, but one of the most recent, Building an Economy for Families Act. This is both a child care and a paid family and medical leave act. So kind of taking the pandemic and the experience of mothers and really trying to translate that into concrete policy change when it comes to both of these issues. We did an analysis last year during the pandemic, which found that more than a third of parenting students lacked access to paid leave, which represents nearly 800,000 students. And mothers, of course, were less likely to have access to that paid leave. So any kind of effort to make paid family and medical leave more accessible to families would have an important impact on student parents, but those working while in school, but also once they graduate and enter the labor force. So, exciting potential investments, and I can't underscore how important I think this is for families, but for student parents in particular, given the challenges we know they face in getting the care they need when at school. So student parent proposals are moving forward as well in some ways. There are a few that I can't share yet because they're not public, but the few that I can, so we've got the budget appropriations process, which happens every fiscal year. IWPR, along with Young Invincibles and Higher Learning Advocates, work together to author and disseminate a sign-on letter in support of increasing C-Campus, the Child Care Access Means Parents in School Act, to $500 million in funding. So this would allow the program to serve roughly 5% of the estimated need among student parents who are Pell eligible and who have children under 6. We know these student parents are in need of affordable care, both in light of the pandemic and otherwise. But that level of investment would also be a huge boon to the campus childcare sector. And for a project that we've been doing for some time, we've been talking a lot with campus childcare center directors, and we've heard, there's been a lot of damage, a lot of loss, revenue loss, lower demand among student parents. And it's a vital supply of convenient and affordable and incredibly high quality care for student parents' children. So funding C Campus to a more robust level would help us safeguard that care for the families who need it. So we received over 60 signatures for that. And to the extent you're talking to your Congress people, can continue to talk to them about this funding level, because we think it could really make a huge impact. And then something new that you may not have heard of is the Student Parent Centers Act. It's not formally introduced yet, but it will be soon. Representative Meng is going to be introducing this act that would establish a grant program for institutions to develop student parent centers. This would focus on institutions that serve a high proportion of students with low incomes. And it would include requirements to do things like establish early alert systems to make sure that staff and professors are aware of the experiences of their student parents and enable them to be connected with high-touch resources and support to help them overcome whatever obstacles they're encountering to their academic progress. It calls out specifically mental health services, which is fantastic, and a number of other resources we know can help student parents succeed. So while this may or may not gain traction this year, the fact that we're seeing proposals like this move forward means that we're getting some traction. We're talking to the right people, and we're getting allies in the sense that people are thinking holistically about both who students are, but who parents can be. And I think the more we can see proposals like this, the better, and the more likelihood we are to get where we need to be in terms of federal support for this population. So a couple of really exciting state level proposals as well as wins. So this is the exciting part of the presentation, in my opinion. So we saw quite a bit of student parent policy activity at the state level this year, which to me, I hope means just continued progress, continued momentum at the state level. So I'll share the Illinois Student Parent Data Collection Bill, which is up with the state legislature now. It's passed the House, the first House chamber. It's in the second, and advocates are optimistic about its pathway. So we can thank Young Invincibles in Illinois, as well as Women Employed, who've been working really hard to help both develop the language, but also push this with the state legislature. And it would be one of the first, but not the first, as we'll hear in a second, laws to require data collection on parent status, which we know is so important for understanding who our student parents are, for designing effective solutions to help boost their access to college and their success in graduating. So we're really, crossing our fingers for that legislation as it moves forward. And then in Texas, this is the second session in which this bill, the Texas Student Parent Liaison Bill, has been introduced. It would require institutions to establish a staff person who would act as the liaison to student parents. So really intentional supportive services and communication with student parents about access to benefit programs, to childcare, to transportation, and other needed supports. It also bakes in the data collection. So it would require reporting on how many student parents there are, their characteristics, as well as their academic outcomes. So Young Invincibles in Texas has been pushing this legislation, both in the past session and now. It passed the House. It's been referred to the Senate Higher Ed Committee, but it seems that the session may end before it can go to a vote. So we can cross our fingers and hope that this traction means that the next session in 2 years will bring us some success. So, I like to think about policy as just a slow moving iterative process. And the more we start to see this type of movement, small successes, but not quite there, we will get there. I do believe we'll get there. And one example of that is in Washington State. The Fair Start for Kids Act was signed into law by Governor Inslee, I think earlier this week or last week. And among many other things for childcare, what this bill does is it increases access to childcare assistance, childcare subsidies through the state program, which is funded by the federal block grant for student parents. So essentially, if you're a full-time student parent attending a community or technical college, you can receive a childcare subsidy for the time that you spend in education. And it allows you to do this without the previous 20-hour work requirement. And it allows you to get an AA or below. So before it was limited to a vocational certificate, and it had that 20-hour work requirement, both of which can be detrimental. You know, if you need childcare support to go to school and you want to get a BA, which ultimately will lead to higher earnings, if you can't get the childcare support to get the AA, to get the BA, you know, we're missing puzzle pieces here. So I think this is just a really important step in the right direction for a state that in many ways is very progressive. So we're seeing, you know, some change here that we've been calling for some time. And I have to give a shout out to Jill Ryan and to the Washington State Association of Head Start and ECAP, which they have been working tirelessly for years with us and with others in the state and with their parent ambassadors to make the case to state legislatures that this is important, that this matters for the economy, for family, economic mobility, and for student success. So it hits on a lot of different points, and we're so excited to see those, you know, these eligibility rules open up for more student parents. And then in Oregon, I have no doubt that we have heard this already at the conference, but it bears reiterating that Michaela Martin has successfully gotten this bill passed, and I'm sure she had lots of help. Michaela's a student mom, she's a parent advisor for Ascend, she's a law student, and she has been working for many years to get this bill on collecting student parent data at the state level made into law, and it's headed to the governor's office as we speak. So I'm excited to see it. I think it's going to stand as an important model for other states to think about and to understand how to collect those data on student parents and why it's important. But even just having kind of a peer state have an example of what this could look like in practice and in legislation is going to hopefully create some momentum at the state level as well. So congratulations to her, congratulations to all the advocates who push for this, as well as student parents in the state. So I'm just going to share a little bit about this recent policy brief we've released. I put this together in partnership with Shante White, who presented earlier, as well as help from Susanna, as always, our tireless, wonderful student parent success team. So this policy brief basically is intended to provide guidance and some specificity and recommendations around how we think federal policy should be prioritizing student parents' needs and experiences when it comes to the big policy reform conversations that we're having around childcare, around higher education, and other pieces. So we focus on 4 categories. Supporting student parents' college access and success, building affordable pathways to college, expanding childcare support and access, as well as increasing basic need security for student parent families. So I'm going to share a few highlights from those recommendations now. You know, these are, it's not the shortest brief, so there are a lot of recommendations, obviously, but I wanted to pull out a few for this conversation. So the first, can't underscore the importance of data collection. You know, we'd love to see this in a reformed, reauthorized Higher Education Act one day. But in the meantime, you know, technical assistance from the Department of Education to help states and institutions understand that you can do this without violating privacy, that there are benefits to institutions to make this happen, to understand the nuances of the student populations you're serving. As well as to kind of peg student parent success to attainment goals. I mean, there are a whole host of reasons why it matters how many student parents there are and having more granular information there. You know, we saw the American Families Plan to propose an increase in the Pell Grant Award, which is great. We want to see it pegged to inflation, and we want it doubled. That's what a lot of advocates have been calling for. And we just know that student parents have financial need that exceeds the amount of aid that they receive. So the more that we can help provide adequate need-based aid, the less debt they'll have to take on, and the more set up they will be for persisting to graduation. And along those lines, making sure student parents know about the dependent care allowance, being forthright about what's available and possible, and when it comes to federal financial aid and child care costs, and making sure student parents are aware of their options. And then establishing a free college program with built-in holistic support. So we want to make sure, we want to make college affordable. We want to make it accessible and equalize opportunity to that to education for all students. But we have to make sure that we're paying attention to the holistic needs of these students and providing supports that can fill gaps, where financial assistance is important and essential, but it's also not enough. So keeping the needs of student parents in mind is going to be really important when thinking about how to design these types of programs. And we also want to make sure that they're accessible to adults, but also returning students. We know student parents often go in and out of the education system for all the reasons that I'm sure the conference has talked about and I've talked about. So making sure that they're still able to access those programs is going to be really important for parenting student success. I mentioned Seek Campus, increasing that to 500 million. We want to continue to encourage leveraging the Head Start program to serve eligible student parent families, and greater collaboration between Head Start and higher education, since we know that there are shared benefits in those partnerships, and that many student parent families are at least income eligible, if not fully eligible. So, and then finally, building up our infrastructure, both in communities as well as on campuses, to meet student parents' housing, food, and mental health needs. There's, growing research around housing and food insecurity, the need for affordable family housing on college campuses, but also the mental health experiences that student parents have. There's some great new research coming out from Ascend at the Aspen Institute that tells us more about what student parents want and need. So we're benefiting from an incredibly rich field of research and learning, and the stories, the voices of student parents, which are becoming more and more prominent in how we think about this. So we need to create action and really capitalize on that movement to make sure that the policy that is passed and the investments we're talking about center student parents. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I think we're going to do questions next, but I appreciate all of you and all that you do for student parents. So I'll stop sharing now.
Thank you, Lindsey, for this very informative presentation, as well as your continued collaboration and support of the symposium and the Access Collaborative Program. So we want to get to the questions. We have a couple of questions in the chat box. We want to look at first a question that goes towards what policies seem to provide the most leverage for existing programs to continue and advance parenting student support?
Yeah, I mean, I think, no one will be surprised that I'll say Head Start is a wonderful opportunity. I don't want to, pretend like Head Start is just swimming in funds and can meet all the existing need, and then student parents are gonna, when we can leverage that, the extra, right? None of these programs have extra, but I think the point that I want to make is that student parent families may be just as eligible as other families. So just connecting the dots there and making sure that the folks who are eligible for these services, which include high quality early learning opportunities for children, wraparound supports, individualized support, and connection to resources for families, for parents. Though we know those things work well for student parents. And if the student parents are eligible for Head Start, why not put them together and make it happen? So, that's why we continue to talk about that as a strategy for leveraging I think in an ideal world, any of these programs, the Child Care Development Block Grant, which is the block grant that funds state child care programs, it's incredibly important for providing full day care. So even if you're in Head Start, for example, and you need to receive assistance for the rest of the day, or if you have Seek Campus, the way things are now, parents need a patchwork of assistance to make it all work together. And I think that that creativity, the braiding and blending of funding is so important for making it work. But it's also really hard, and there aren't enough funds to go around. So you can leverage, but I think at the end of the day, the investments we're talking about potentially, we can all call our congresspeople, our senators, and make it known that we want that to happen, because it would be a dramatic change and improvement in the system for student parent families, but for families more broadly as well.
Excellent. That is very, very important. Advocacy will get us everywhere we need to get. So we need to really be not only advocates on our campus, but we do need to be advocates, on the national level as well, and getting that word to our local politicians. Another question that we have from the chat box is, will the Student Parent Centers Act support existing student parent centers or only the development of new ones?
So I think only the development of new ones, but I have to emphasize that they are still kind of finalizing the language for that bill. It hasn't been introduced yet, so it's not final yet, but from what I've seen, I think it's the development of new ones.
Okay, great, thank you. Next question. From your experience, have some of the best practices changed due to the impact and recovery of parenting students?
So best practices for serving student parents?
Yes.
Well, I think yes and no. The pandemic just made everything worse. The struggles that these families were encountering, the struggles of institutions and centers and activists to support these, all of it together, I think it was just heightened as a result of the pandemic. And there were some new challenges too, particularly around the need for safety precautions, health precautions, the mental health effects on families of losing family members, and becoming ill, all of that was absolutely new. The fear that accompanied the pandemic for all of us. And then the nature of consuming education changed dramatically, although it is slowly starting to come back to quote unquote, whatever normal will look like. But the remote nature of children's learning, as well as parents and education together, I think a lot of people learned a lot of new things about themselves and about their children during this time. And I don't know what to say. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's becoming clearer that we have to be really intentional about how we support students with kids, about the extent of the emotion, the capacity, the bandwidth they pour into everything they're doing every day for their kids, for themselves, in school, at work, commuting, the whole thing together. And I really appreciate Ascend at the Aspen Institute and the Jed Foundation's new work around mental health support, because I think we've all sort of been through a trauma with this pandemic in different ways, and that's certainly been experienced at more extreme levels for students with kids, given how they sit at kind of the intersection of all of those experiences. So, I think it's yet to be seen, will we see more hybrid learning, more online learning, and how will you provide the supports that you need when you're in an online class, right? Making sure that if we're switching more to a remote learning environment, that the concrete supports, the high touch person-to-person supports don't go away, because they're still needed, even if you're getting education in your living room on the computer. So we'll see what happens, but I hope that it will just encourage us to do more of what we know can work and what folks need.
Great, thank you. There was a question in regards to Senate Bill 0267. Will childcare data still be part of the bill?
Let me just read that. Yeah, I mean, I'm not an expert on this, so I haven't been one of the part of the group working on this in Illinois, so I do not know the nuances of the bill. Will childcare data still be part of the bill? I don't know the answer to that. I don't quite understand the question. Sorry. But Autumn, you can connect with me offline, and I'm happy to connect you with the folks who've been working on it in Illinois.
Okay, another question from the box is, can you speak to the national and/or public emphasis in getting people into low-wage jobs versus longer-term commitments for higher education attainment? What data do you have about supporting degree attainment, especially for single parents?
Yeah, so I think we're hearing a lot of kind of a combined conversation about post-secondary education. So workforce development, registered apprenticeships, certificate programs, in addition to kind of trying to avoid the COVID melt where we've seen enrollment drop, particularly in community colleges, and getting people back into the classroom. So I think it's sort of a combination. In my opinion, it needs to be an emphasis on degree and certificate programs are going to lead to living wage jobs. And we need to make sure that student parents, particularly mothers and mothers of color, have clear pathways, supportive pathways that are accessible to them to get into careers that will help them sustain their families, and avoid any kind of tracking into low wage occupations. The focus has to be on, if we're talking about trying to help families recover from an economic recession, getting them into low paying jobs is just that's not the way. So being really intentional about how we design job training and workforce development programs so that women, that mothers, single mothers have access to the childcare support they need. If their construction program starts at 6 a.m, they need to have support for their kids. And this is going to matter as we see growing demand for positions that require some post-secondary attainment. We can't just rely on the traditional folks. There's more demand than there is supply at this point, particularly now. So, and I think it's going to be really important because women and mothers have been the most impacted, and particularly Black and Latina women. So reskilling, upskilling can include both the job training side and the higher education side, depending on their preferences. But regardless of the direction, it has to lead to a quality job that allows them to support their family. So, and in turn, I think we're hearing that, but the execution of that discourse is kind of where we're going to see whether or not it actually happens, and we're going to continue to push for it. And in terms of data on supporting degree attainment for single parents, I think you mean what supports single parents' ability to get degrees. We don't have we have a lot of work that's focused on student parent success and also the benefits of degree attainment for single mothers in particular. I think, what we know for student parents generally is true for single parents, but to a heightened degree. So affordable childcare access, campus-based, high quality, making sure that there's individualized support to accessing resources that can help meet basic needs, that can help navigation of college settings, of financial aid, of classroom policies, and all of that. So, yeah, and okay, that was it, I think, for that question.
Thank you. The next question we have is, another IWPR report has indicated that women have been most economically impacted by the pandemic. A she session. It's hard to say. Thank you. How does this impact the parenting students we support, i.e. income requirements, paying for school, childcare, housing, etc.?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've talked a lot about this sort of throughout. I think something like 2/3 of student parents are working while they're in school. We know 70% of student parents are mothers. So you can see where it dovetails, right? If we're seeing greater unemployment and disconnection from the workforce among women, we know student moms are going to be mixed up in that. And even mothers who have been disconnected from education, so who perhaps prior or during this last year have decided to delay or pause their education, so waiting for their opportunity to go back, but not having the job flexibility or the finances or the childcare support that they need to get there. And yes, absolutely, when we see things like Washington's removal of work requirements for childcare assistants, that's a huge step in the right direction. But we need all benefit programs to be more accessible for students and for students with kids. And we want to see the removal of time limits for the reception of those benefit programs like TANF and child care assistance. So there's certainly work to be done. And I think some of the national conversation around child care investment, paid family leave, and so forth will benefit the working mothers, the studying mothers, and those who are in both worlds.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Another question we have is, in December, the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center released data that indicated steep declines in community college enrollment. Do you think these numbers, including a large subset of parenting students, a large subset of parenting students? If so, what factors could have influenced this?
I mean, I think yes. I think the answer is yes. And I think, we don't have the data to really know that definitively, but there are a few studies out there that suggest that student parents have been more likely to choose to delay or pause their education as a result of the pandemic. And, you can imagine that the conflation of a number of factors, their children needing homeschooling, or just being home all the time for remote learning, parents whose education has switched to online and having to juggle those two things together. If parents have lost their jobs, which were important for putting food on the table, that leaves you with a choice between spending money on your education and feeding your family, and that's a easy choice. Your family's going to come first. So one can imagine a whole slew of factors that have affected whether or not student parents have been able to continue their education, but also enter newly, right? We're going to be releasing work soon that looks at the share of adults with some college credit but no degree who are parents, and a third of adults in that position have children under 18. And if they wanted to go back in that time, the choice may have been no, even if they knew that ultimately it would lead to a higher paying job, because it was just too much to juggle and not enough support. So, this has been a strange year for all of us. It's been certainly a transition or has required a lot of adaptations on all of our parts to just make things work for us and our families. And when student parents have, they were already kind of strapped for time, for money, for support, and layering this on top of that, one can understand, let's just put it on hold for a second, get things together, and then hopefully come back. So we just need to make sure that the pathways for getting back on that road to education are available and are providing adequate support for those student parents who do come back.
I see. Another question we have is, what are some ways parenting students could influence policies for better support?
Yeah, I think one thing I love about this conference is how many student parents are invited to speak and participate. And I think continuing to tell their story to the extent that they are comfortable with that, there's nothing like hearing a student parent talk about their day-to-day life, their the different experiences they've had on campus with professors, both positive and negative, right? And I think hearing the level of dedication and commitment they have to getting that degree for their children, for themselves, that type of drive is what we should all want in our classrooms, on our campuses. And so just continuing to communicate the brilliance of these student parents, their work ethic, their time management skills, all the benefits they bring, as well as the barriers that have been erected that have kept them, that have hampered their progress, is going to be really important for getting the policy change that we need.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question from the chat box, and it says, we have a question on the college admission form that asks if student is a single parent, but not all students answer it. How do we encourage students to feel more comfortable answering the question? Has the stigma affected students' willingness to declare single parent status?
I don't think we know that the answer to that definitively, but you have to assume yes. I mean, when you hear stories of the types of stigma, stereotype, judgment that student parents experience when interacting with folks in their classroom or on campuses, yeah, I mean, you can understand the fear, the anxiety that could come with disclosing a really personal fact about yourself. So we have a lot of work to do in terms of culture change and removing that stigma around what's considered the appropriate order of your life, the order in which you do things, or who and what a college student is, what they should look like, what their life should look like. And again, emphasizing the benefits that student parents bring to campuses and the real value that they bring. But I think the ways that our campuses can do this, as well as student parent programs or student support programs generally, is working to communicate that student parents are important to the fabric of the campus life and to the campus community. Visually displaying student parents as integral to who is on campus. Just working hard. You see the commercials for University of Phoenix with student parents. It's a well-produced commercial. They're breastfeeding while doing their math homework. And yeah, it seems like a great place for a student parent to attend. So we need to learn from them and bring that to our high quality institutions, our public institutions, and make it clear in how we display who a college student is, that student parents are present, they're welcome, and that we are gonna be intentional about how we serve them. So we've got some work to do there. I think it can happen, and as we see laws getting passed around student parent data collection, we see potential increases in C-campus, maybe, the more we can come at it from both ends, I think the better traction we'll make.
Excellent, thank you. Do you have any final parting words?
I just want to, thank you again for bringing me back to this wonderful conference. I've been going to this conference for the last, I think this is my 7th year in a row of attending, and it's such a special group of people, of advocates, of student parents. It's such a special experience to be able to share and learn from each other. And I'm grateful to you, Tracy, for continuing to make this happen, and to your team that I know have been working tirelessly to make this happen. And I really do hope that we can all be together in person next year for the next iteration. So I hope you all have a wonderful end of your day and year, and stay in touch.
Great. Thank you. I guess my takeaways from this is data, as well as campus and political advocacy, is the most important key to the work that we're doing. And, hopefully the American Families Plan and the American Jobs Plan will hopefully move from being plans to actually being something that comes into action. So thank you, Lindsey, for being here and giving us that update of some very, very important information and things that we need to pay attention to as we continue to work with this population. Also, thank you to everyone for joining us today. I hope that from the opening to the closing and everything in between has motivated and inspired you, that you have more tools in your toolbox to empower the parenting students that you are working with. In the earlier concurrent session, Michaela Martin said it best, you can't help us without us. So, reach out as you're working with parenting scholars on your campus. Let them know that they are seen. Invite them to the table so they won't be on the menu, as Yaslin and Maya also stated earlier. Both of them are Ascend parenting advisors and gave great information. The parenting scholars that are joining us today, make your voices and your needs heard. I hope you leave today feeling empowered, feeling motivated, and ready to conquer the college system. Use the power of the Ghanaian word Sankofa, meaning retrieve or go back and get. Get involved on your campuses so that you can make it more accepting of families and parenting students, so you can go back and support those who are coming behind you. For all of us, this is very important work that has come. This is very important work that has come so far, and there's still so much work to do. Working with you all and the amazing things happening in supporting parenting students is an honor. As we focus and organize this year, or Focanize, as our opening speaker, Dr. Ford, gave us this morning, we will continue doing this important work. And we will also be working on and planning on hosting the National Student Parent Support Symposium on the campus of The Ohio State University in May of 2022. So mark your calendars. Also, all sessions have been recorded. You will receive emails that will include information on how to retrieve the recordings and the information on receiving CEUs if you needed them. Thank you again. We hope you have enjoyed this year's symposium in the last 2 days here with us, and we look forward to seeing you again on campus in 2022. Have a great day.